with children and youth, I find their notions on life to be brutally honest. Can I get an amen from teachers out there? When I come across sayings that deal with romance and love, especially from children and youth, I could not resist not sharing these with you. Here is the response to the question, how do people in love typically behave? One child said, when a person gets kissed for the first time, they fall down and don't get up for at least an hour. To the question, why do people in love hold hands? Gavin, age 8, said, they want to make sure the rings don't fall off because they paid good money for this. Kid's on to something. Here's the response to the subject of confidential opinions about love. Love is foolish, said Jill, age 6, then continued, but I still might try it sometime. However, Dave, age 8, had a different opinion. Love will find you even if you're trying to hide from it. I've been trying to hide from it since I was 5, but the girls keep finding me. To the question, what are some ways to make someone fall in love with you? Dell, age 6, said, tell them that you own a whole bunch of candy stores. I think that kid's onto something there. Then there are the 2 boys who shared their thoughts on kissing. If it's your mom, you can kiss her anytime, but if it's a new person, you better ask for permission. That came from Roger, age 6. And I think that can relate to anybody of any age. And Bill, also age 6, says, I look at it this. Kissing is fine if you like it, but it's a free country and nobody should be forced to do it. This morning we conclude our sermon series on those things we wish Jesus never said. These are passages that are harsh to hear, radical in their message and ministry, and controversial in any age. But today we've got a doozy. And I can't think of it to describe it any other way than just confusing. So take a listen.
Okay, I'm reading from Matthew 22, 34 through 46, and this is the New Revised Standard Version. And you want the whole thing? Okay. When the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together, and one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question to test him. Teacher, which commandment in the law is the greatest? He said to him, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the greatest and first commandment. And a second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these 2 commandments hang all the law and the prophets. Now, while the Pharisees were gathered together, Jesus asked them this question. What do you think of the Messiah? Whose son is he? They said to him, the son of David. He said to them, how is it then that David, by the Spirit, calls him Lord, saying, the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I put your enemies under your feet. If David thus calls him Lord, how can he be his son? No one was able to give him an answer, nor from that day did anyone dare to ask him any more questions.
This passage would have been great, would have been excellent if he would have just stopped at verse 40. Because everything after that, which I'm calling the whole second part, is just really hard to figure out. Just really confusing. It kind of reminds me of the story of a dog food company's newest product that just was not selling well. So the president gathers all the management staff and he asks, how's our advertising? Great, said the advertising executive. This ad campaign will probably win the industry's top award. All right, the president continued. How about our product design? And the production management, they spoke up. It was great, boss. Our new label and packaging scored high in every marketing test we ran. How about our sales staff? Are they doing their job? The sales manager was quick to respond. He said, oh, sure, our people are best in the business. And with that, there was this heavy silence in the room as the president thought about what he just heard. We've got great advertising. We got great packaging, top-notch sales force. Yet this product is coming in dead last on the dog food market. Does anyone have any idea what the problem might be? Everyone, they kind of looked at each other until finally one person stood up and says, "It's those stupid dogs, sir. They just won't touch the stuff." Now that's confusing. An old legend says that when God created the world, the angels were in awe. As he created the animals, the angels, they wanted to give it a try. So God agreed, and the Animal Creation Committee designed the platypus. A creation with the bill of a duck, the fur of a dog, the tail of a beaver, and the feet of a frog. Since that day, there have been no committees in heaven. Confusion in heaven, confusion in the church, confusion in what Jesus says. Gosh, I wish he hadn't said that. Now, it's not just me. People much smarter than me, with more degrees than I, biblical scholars have looked at that second part of this passage today and honestly do not have a clue as to what Jesus is saying. But I think the key here for this whole passage is found in verse 46. It's that last verse that Vicki read to us. No one was able to give him an answer, nor from that day did anyone dare to ask him any more questions. Now, I don't know if it was intentional, but the results were no more questions, no more debates. The discussion is final. Jesus is getting us to focus on the vision, on the mission, on the very key of this passage, and that is love. Bruce Olson was a missionary among the Motilone Indians that lived along the border of Colombia and Venezuela. Bruce had lived in this land for some 28 years, trying to spread the gospel when he was kidnapped by communist guerrillas. Now the communists, they wanted Bruce to convince the Indians of the worth of their cause, but Bruce would not be persuaded to support them or their leader in Castro. So the guerrillas began to torture Bruce. But that only inspired him to show them the love of Christ. Bruce noticed noticed all this unhygienic practices of the soldiers was contributing to a lot of diseases that was spreading in the camp. And so he told one of the camp officers, and almost immediately they changed their habits. Bruce also taught the cooks some of his recipes and he would cook with some of the soldiers. He helped illiterate soldiers write love letters to their girlfriends. Everything that Bruce did sprang from the resolution to show the love of Christ to these brutal men who were trying so hard to break his spirit. As Bruce writes, we each had a strategy. They wanted to enter my life, and I wanted to enter theirs. I was the one making headway. And with that, God honored Bruce's resolution. One of the young guerrillas became a Christian. And when Bruce became desperately ill and needed a blood transfusion, the guerrillas fought for the honor of donating blood to him. It was the Christian soldier who was allowed the honor. After months of imprisonment and torture, Bruce was told that he was going to be killed soon. So he was put up against a wall, and 18 soldiers, they lined up their machine guns at Bruce. Some of them were crying at what they had to do, and the order came to fire, but nothing. They found that someone had loaded all the guns with blanks. It was a last-ditch attempt to force Bruce to change his mind. But it didn't work. Bruce was free to go. All the propaganda, all the weapons, all the evil tactics of this group had not been able to extinguish the example of one man filled with the love of God and intent upon sharing that love with others. The communist guerrillas thought that they had captured someone who they could control and manipulate. Instead, they captured someone who, through the love of God, was able to control them. Things are not always as they seem. I chuckle at this next story about this pastor that he was on a long walk and he noticed this woman struggling to push up this baby carriage up this really steep hill. And so the pastor, he went over to help the woman up this hill, and it was one of these old rickety baby carriages, and it had a bent wheel, and they tried everything they could. And they finally got it up to the hill. They got it up to the woman's house, and as the woman thanked the pastor said, "May I mind just having a peek at your little one, the one that I helped you push up and to your house?" And the woman laughed and said, "Mercy me, Pastor, this ain't a baby you're struggling with. It's my husband's weekly 6-pack of beer." No, things are not always what they seem. A colleague of mine shared those two stories with me. And he said to me, he says, "I wonder how many people could look at their lives, look at our lives, your life and my life, and know that there are two laws which Christians are to conform. To love God and to love our neighbor as ourselves. That's it. That's what it means to be a follower of Jesus Christ. Love God, love your neighbor." Now, I would add one more caveat to this message from my co-minister. It's the end of the discussion. Period. Jesus may have added a confusing end to this passage, but there is no confusion when it comes to love. Love is the answer. Love is the end game. Love is our focus. This week I traveled to Lincoln for a meeting. I sit on the board of directors of the Nebraska United Methodist Foundation. And at that meeting I saw Tom. Now I had the honor of working with Tom's two boys when I was their pastor, and they were in my youth group. I found when I worked with Tom, he was a brilliant engineer, he was a great businessman, and he was a wonderful Christian. I still remember one time after a church meeting, and Tom was in my office, and he looked at me and said, "Seth, we need to be praying more. This church needs to be praying more." And so I suggested to Tom that we organize a prayer group. And Tom looked at me and says, "No, you don't know what I mean. We need to be praying all the time. This church needs to be praying every chance that we get." Now, in my years of working with Tom, I found him to be a great visionary, and I loved his wisdom. But in that discussion, it was a reminder of truly what is important in life. Now, Tom and I, we hadn't seen each other in 15 years. And so we spent some time getting caught up. And since Tom and I were both on the foundation together, I asked him about Aurora's endowment fund. And something that we had set up 15 years ago with the foundation. And so I said, what is Aurora doing with the money that we put into the foundation so many years ago? And Tom told me the story about how they had taken this VFW building and they converted the basement into a youth center with TVs and computer game consoles and pool tables. And as Tom said, it's for the youth of the community. They have nothing to do after school. They don't belong to a church. They just needed a place to go so they don't get into trouble. I thought, all this from some money that we put away some 15 years ago. And then interest has kind of sat there and built up. And then Tom looked at me and he says, "You know why I'm on this board? We are in the Jesus business, not the bunny business. I do this out of love because he loves us." Well said, Tom. I couldn't agree more. Now, I'm going to ask the ushers to hand out these brochures. And you might be thinking to yourself, this is a brochure about the endowment fund. And you might be thinking to yourself, great, another plea for money. I mean, look what we've already had. We had your pledge for the building fund. We had your pledge for the next year's giving. And now we've got for the endowment fund. Oh my gosh, this is just as confusing as the last part of Jesus' message. But I'm here to tell you that out of this single-minded sense of confusion is love. I'm here to tell you that the endowment, gotta get my brochure. When I practiced this, it never went forward, it always went back. This endowment is a mechanism for the future. In fact, I'm here to tell you this is not a plea for money. I want to be really clear about this. The endowment is a mechanism for what takes place 15 to 20 years down the road. Think of it as a way to focus on our future. Maybe you're looking at a way of as sheltering some of your money from taxes. You know, a charitable gift annuity through the endowment can do just that. Maybe you're thinking about making some changes in your will. The endowment is a way, as a mechanism for that. Or maybe you just want to focus on where the church will be down the road. This brochure is for informational purposes only. Period. Just like Jesus' last statement, Everything we do out of love. Nothing else. End of discussion. Everything remains focused on just that. There's a story that Corrie ten Boom tells about an old Russian woman that lay on a sofa. Multiple sclerosis had twisted her body almost beyond imagination. The simplest tasks had become impossible for her. As Corrie would visit her at night, she would have to go at night to avoid the communist authorities just so that she could see this woman. When she got there, Corrie kissed the woman's wrinkled cheek. This old woman could only respond by rolling her eyes and smiling because the atrophied muscles on her neck would no longer allow her head to move. And the only part of her body that she could still control was her right hand. And with her gnarled knuckles, she stroked Corrie's face. And Corrie reached up to take in her hand and kissed her index finger, which, as she said, was for a very special reason. You see, the routine was the same every morning as the old lady was propped up into her seating position on the sofa. A battered old typewriter was placed on a table right in front of her, and every day the old woman would begin to type. Now, she could only use that one index finger to peck out the letters, but this woman was serving God by translating Christian books into Russian. It was slow going, sometimes only typing a page or two a day, but this was her way of loving God. She types portions of the Bible, as well as some books of Billy Graham and other Christian witnesses. The woman's attitude was extraordinary. She saw her sickness as a prerequisite, not a detriment, for the work that she did. Every other Christian in the city was watched by the secret police, but because she was ill, she could work undetected, spreading the good news of Jesus to people who were starving for good news. Not only does she translate these books, her husband told Corrie, but she prays while she types. Sometimes it takes a long time for her finger to hit the key or for her to get the paper in the machine, but all the time she is praying for those books that she is working on. You know, I still remember the first movie I ever saw. We were living in Heber, Nebraska. I was about 5 years old. And it was Superman with Christopher Reeve. If you remember, this actor had everything. He had fame, he had wealth, and as my wife reminds me, he was incredibly handsome. He was a rising star in Hollywood. And if you remember the story, the actor who played the Man of Steel was just a mortal. He fell from a horse and was left a quadriplegic. When he woke from his accident, his first thought was that maybe he should just go ahead and die. But one thing stopped him and gave him the will to live. His wife, Dana, who spoke to him firmly yet gently. I'm only going to say this once, she said. I will support you whatever you want to do because this is your life and your decision. But I want you to know that I'll be with you for the long haul, no matter what. You're still you, and I love you. Those words gave Christopher Reeve the strength to go on. He committed himself to search for a cure to his disability. Unfortunately, he didn't live to see it, but that dedication and commitment to love kept him going. Everything. The entire focus, nothing but love. Period. Jesus ends the discussion, maybe on purpose, but it is a great reminder of what we do and why we do what we do. If there is conflict in your life, conflict in your job, conflict in the church, conflict in your family, conflict with your parents, your kids, you name it, don't forget about love. If you're trying to make a decision, and it could be on any aspect of life, think of how we should proceed out of love. Let us forget about that confusing second part of Jesus' message and just focus